Hello, I'd like to introduce you to this mosaic sculpture based on a Coosa bass. The fish is swimming here in the Marietta Cobb Museum of Art as part of the Metro Montage 2021 show. Eventually, it'll find a forever home somewhere in a landscape. In the following video vignettes, you will have the opportunity to see the sculpture from start to finish with the concept drawings and plans, making the various tesserae, even the patina on the elements that are made out of copper. So I ran into a problem. Initially, I put the gold leaf on the back side, which is a traditional way of having a gold leaf tesserae. But making these little tiny fish scale shapes, on the grinding wheel, I was getting little chips and flakes coming off of the gold, and it just wasn't what I was happy with. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but the solution was to put the gold leaf between two layers, so it's a gold leaf sandwich between two layers of 1/8 inch glass that's then fused in the kiln. Well, I've made some progress on the fish. I'm cutting out scales. I'm developing my palette by fusing together glass colored blanks and then cutting out the individual scales. And I'm coordinating my palette to way a fish's coloration goes. Towards the top of a fish will be much darker, so that looking down it's hidden against the bottom of a stream, and looking up it's obscured against the light of the surface of the water. So the underside of a fish is whiter, and the top side of a fish is very dark. I've been also adding some of the gold, and in the dark area I made a blank that has iridized, that's sort of a bronzy color, a darker gold to go with the dark. Some of the scales are translucent and some are opaque, which gives a different play of light when the light shines onto the surface of the glass. There will also be some iridized in the white and in the middle areas of the fish as well. So, lots of progress. Several hundred scales have been made, just a few thousand more. So, along with continuing to fuse lots more pieces for making the scales, I'm now ready to do the eyes. And I'm using a cathedral gold on top of the red to give it some depth, and also adding this little bit of a highlight right in the middle of the eye. After they're fused, the eyes will then be slumped to make a concave, convex shape. So the first firing of the eyes is complete, and after this I will slump them so that they have a slightly domed shape. Yay, so good things happening and such. Have now made the cartoon for the fish full scale, and I will use this cartoon both for making the pattern for bending the copper wire to make the fins and the tail, and also for starting to lay out the design of all of these scales I've been cutting. But one of the things that's developed, originally I was overemphasizing the eyes, and now I have changed my mind and I want to make it a more natural size. And so I have this set of eyes that's way too big, and this set of eyes that's perfect, and I'm working on the next step is to define all of the highlights and shadows of the pieces that go around the eyes, and then I will start laying out the patterns of all of the scales, and I'll do that onto some sticky paper. This cartoon will then also become the pattern. I'll cut it out and I'll use it to make the profile for the sides and the profile for the top in cutting the foam pieces. The other thing that I've been working on, I have the fish drawn to full scale as a cartoon that I will be transferring to the foam, and I've been bending the copper that will become the fins, the tail. On the dorsal fin, I've also hammered the copper a little bit so that it has some angles. This will help catch light and shadow and make this a little more visible. The copper wire will then go into the foam and attach to the posts that are the structure for holding the fish up in the air. And I've done scale of the tail and each of the fins. The copper wire will then, when the fish is done, will be patinaed with vinegar, salt, ammonia, and it'll become a sort of a blue-greenish color that will go well with the colors that I'm using in the scales of the fish. The next step is to cut out the cartoon, transfer this profile to the foam, and cut out the blanks of foam. So after cutting out the cartoon, the profile, transfer it to the foam, these 4 pieces will then be cut out using a regular foam cutter. They will be pinned together, and then the top view of the fish profile will be placed on top of that, and that will be cut out. So I'll basically have the 3-dimensional shape of the fish. Okay, so I've taken the heat and cut out my 4 blanks. I'm now going to line them up and hold them together with these skewers. And then I will take the top view, mark it out on top, and cut that shape out and start to rough in the overall shape. I will also use a rasp for a little bit of fine tuning, and I'll get it to that moderately roughed in shape, and then I'll work on adding the fins and the supports before I finalize it. So here we are, working on the next phase. While the 4 pieces of foam are still pegged together, I'm using the foam cutter to roughly sculpt the shape of the fish, and the fish will be refined later on after the fins are added and the supports are added. The next step after I get it roughly shaped is to divide it in half, take 2 pieces and glue them together on either side, and then have that opened in the middle so that I can add the supports. And what I'm doing with the foam cutter is I'm just letting the heat roughly shape and the reason we're outside for this is the fumes from the foam. So I'm now at the stage of doing the final refinements on the form, and I'm using just a serrated kitchen knife, making some adjustments and smoothing things out with a rasp. And this will be the final step before I cover the entire fish with the thin vinyl mesh and put the first coat of thinset on. So the fish has now been completely covered and overlapped with the adhesive vinyl. Sometimes going over contours, it's necessary to cut some little darts in the vinyl so that it'll curve and lay down well. Even so, at times, it doesn't want to lay down, in which case I use the same glue, the 3M Super 77, and just spray a little on, wait 30 seconds, and then press those areas in a little tighter. Just adding the thinset will also help press some of those areas in and maintain the shapes. Okay, so now it's time to butter the mummy. I've got thinset mixed up and then allowed to slake and then remixed, and now I'm applying it very thinly, and I will let that set up, and then I will do a second layer to build it up. I'm applying it just with a knife, and I'm forcing it down into the texture, and then I use a soft brush to just lightly take some of the ridges out. I will do it top down, and then I'll wait 24 hours. I'll turn the fish over and I'll do it bottom up. That's it. So now I'm ready to do the second layer. of the thinset. I took the rasp, knocked off all the little rough spots on the first layer, and smoothed it out just a little bit, refined it just a little bit, and then I recovered it with the sticky back vinyl mesh. And this time it's important to really force the thinset down through the mesh so that it connects to the previous layer, and then to smooth it out on top and fill in any divots and make it as smooth as possible. And then we'll be ready for the mosaic tiles. So I have the fish, our little Coosa bass, temporarily cradled in the cardboard box so I can work on the belly side. And then after that's done, I'll flip it over and actually embed it in the ground so I can work on the top side. One of the things that I've been doing is, besides fusing the pieces of glass to make the tesserae, I'm also slumping the glass, a second firing, so that it can bend around the contours of the shape of the fish. This is especially important to have a really tight curve where I'm bending it around the tighter curves of the jaw and even wrapping the edge of the tail. So after the belly, we've flipped the fish back over and we're working on the dorsal side now. Brought the pattern up on the sides and up around the mouth, and on the dorsal side we'll use a lot of the very dark for the top of the fish, but also some of the iridized and the gold tesserae, just for more visual interest. Okay, so I've been working on developing the horizontal striping on the face to correspond to the vertical striping on the body. And I'm also working light at the bottom to dark at the top, the same as on the body. So after I get all of the tesserae on, I will then work on grouting, first cleaning up all the little points here and there, and then grouting the fish using a dark grout from the top down, and then a light grout from the bottom up to continue the chiaroscuro in the background color. So now I'm ready to start grouting. Just before I grout, I go around and clean it up. Now I used a little extra thinset so that each of these tesserae was well seated. Some of the thinset comes up through, and since I'm doing the grouting in a zoning where I'm using dark at the top, about halfway down, and then light on the bottom, I don't want those little bits of thinset showing. So I take a jeweler's file and I go in between and just make sure I remove as many little bits as possible. If after I'm done, if there are some that are showing, I can use an indelible ink and color them to the exact color of the grout once it's dry. So the grout, it's important to mix it up and then let it sit, remix. And what that does is any bits of colorant that weren't evenly distributed get distributed, and any little bits that weren't evenly moist. And then when I'm grouting something that is three-dimensional like this, I tend to put some grout on, and then I will use a plastic merchant's card. It's flexible and it lets me get in lots of directions and into the curved spaces. I can also use a Scotch-Brite pad. Same idea. The flexibility of it lets me get the grout into all of the little spaces. Really worked in and then allowed to set, and then I'll start cleaning it up with a damp sponge. Once the grout is completely dry on this side, I will flip the fish over and do the light colored grout. So the process has moved along. I've been using a sponge to do the cleaning. For the grout, I prefer Caracolor U, unsanded. A lot of this glass is soft and I don't want to scratch the surface of the tesserae. I also prefer the Caracolor over what it's being replaced with because it has a longer working time. And the new formulas are ideal, I guess, for a contractor who's doing a bathroom or something, but I want more working time because my tesserae are uneven and I need to go over every square inch and make sure I have the grout down in and around each of these tiles. I do like the range of colors that they have, but if they phase out the Caracolor, I may be looking for a new company. Okay, moving along. Now that the grout has set up and cured and dried out, we're applying a grout sealer. And I just do this with a brush and I follow each seam. And I don't worry about getting the grout sealer on the surface of the tesserae because the glass is a non-porous surface and the grout sealer will absorb into the grout in 2, maybe 3 coats, and what is left on the surface after 5 or 10 minutes when it's absorbed and is drying can just be readily wiped back clean with a clean cotton cloth. You would have a lot more trouble if it was porous stone or other kinds of tile, but the glass tiles is relatively easy to accomplish this. Now I'll put 2 or 3 coats on to make sure it's well sealed, but for maintenance, after this piece has been in situ for a year or so, it would be a good idea to go ahead and wash it off with with soap and let it dry completely, and then reapply the grout sealer, and that maintenance could be an ongoing sort of a thing. Now, as a final consideration, I'm adding color by using patina to the copper elements in the sculpture. I want to develop these teal and soft blue-green colors to go with the tesserae in the fish. Copper would develop a patina on its own naturally, depending on the atmosphere it's in, but I want to accelerate that process. Make sure no one's listening, because now I'm going to reveal the super secret formula for the patina. It starts with salt. And I use, for the acid in the formula, a cleaning vinegar, because it's a higher concentration and it's a bit stronger than regular vinegars. And copper sulfate, which is an algicide that's used in ponds. And then, as an oxidizer, I use Miracle-Gro soluble plant food. The patina is simply applied. The liquid cold patina is simply applied with a brush and allowed to dry, and this process is repeated several times until the color starts to develop. When I was in graduate school, in the men's urinal would be stacks of the small bronze pieces, because the acid that they were using was uric acid, and never mind. Okay, so there's a lot of latitude with the patina formula. Basically, it's an acid and a salt and some metal salts and an accelerator and oxidizer. But you could do a gourmet formula and use Himalayan pink salt and balsamic vinegar. Another thing, though, is if you want specific colors, especially warmer tones, reds and stronger blues, you might need to do the patina formula hot, apply it to hot metal, in which case you would apply the patina before you start assembling the sculpture.